Right, let's get into our story of the week. Child Protection Week wraps up today. There are horrific numbers and stats on child abuse and neglect in South Africa. Professor Sebastiaan van As of the University of Cape Town has done research on the number of injured children treated at the Red Cross Children's Hospital. In 1 year, the hospital treats 10,000 children for injuries that otherwise could be avoided. That translates to 200 children a week. And as Child Protection Week wraps up today, that's just one of the country's many challenges. I'm now joined in studio by Colonel Celeste van der Klaashorst from the SAPS. Gugu Xaba is Programs Director from Save the Children South Africa. Victorine Groe is a parenting activist. And we also have joining us in studio from the African Diaspora Forum, and he's the chairman there, Vusumuzi Sibanda. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. We've got such a lot to get through. There are so many issues pertaining to child protection. Ways that children are vulnerable, specifically in determining by their sort of social structure, class, where they come from, the kind of dangers that they're exposed to. I want to start off here with you, Colonel. As Child Protection Week wraps up, what are the key things that the SAPS looks at in trying to improve how we protect our children?
And Lena, I think the SAPS has various aspects relating to commitment and incentives. But during the last Child Protection Week, we are part of a very, very much bigger picture. So the SAPS are committed in going out there, partaking in awareness campaigns with other stakeholders, with other governmental departments, with NGOs, my very good friends who are seated on my left. And it's an ongoing program, you know. We're very grateful for these awareness campaigns because with awareness comes a certain amount or degree of protection. And with protection comes reporting. And from there, our stakeholder integrated approach kicks in. And we are able to try as best we can to address the surge and the scourge that's there.
Right. In terms of, and I'm going to move on from you very shortly, but I want to, while we're still chatting to you, touch on the problems with regard to prosecution. From when we know that we have a rate of abuse, rape, violence against children, and that's often underreported. Once cases are reported and they make their way into the investigation and criminal justice system, there are certain challenges that the SAPS would face in terms of assisting the NPA in making sure that those who have been accused are, and those who are found guilty are prosecuted and that they, spend time behind bars, and that in that way we are protecting our children. What are the challenges there in terms of legislation that we need to address?
Only I think I'm not a prosecutor, so I can't speak for the prosecution. But the South African Police Service is there to enforce the law. So we follow the processes and procedures relating to law. And I must say, in terms of children, which is our topic of the day, South Africa has excellent legislation. I think world-class legislation when it comes to crimes against children. And for me, it's very important to reiterate that SAPS can't get a successful case to court unless we have stakeholder cooperation. So, for example, you would get the first port of call, the victim goes to the client service centre of the SAPS, he reports a case, FCS is contacted as the specialised investigation, a medical follows, counselling follows. So with that, all stakeholders, and we can't take that case to court unless there's 100% cooperation. And I must say, coming to that and highlighting this last week, and back to the CJS system, we've had brilliant successes in the last weeks. I'm talking about, for example, in Eastern Cape, we've had life sentences on a rape. In Free State, we've had life sentences plus years imprisonments on rape of an 11-year-old. In Gauteng High Court last week, life sentence, etc., plus life imprisonment for extreme torture of a 3-year-old mother and father. So, and that is not...
We're making strides.
We're making strides as long as it's an integrated approach and we're taking hands.
Gugu, that brings me to you. So as an NGO, what kind of interactions do you think we still need to see between NGOs, governmental structures, and parents? Because I think often that's a missing link in the chain, is that those administrative organizations are there doing their bit, but the link to the people on the ground, sometimes, you know, that might be missing. What for you is a key step we need to be taking?
Okay. Thank you very much for that question. Save the Children South Africa realizes that when a child is violated, it is in a home setting. So government, non-governmental organizations, and all other businesses and all other sectors have a responsibility to ensure that we work with the home, because a child will not be mainly violated outside the home. So that is why then government is saying, one, we have policies that have been developed in order to protect a child in the home setting, and government acknowledges that partnerships, as Celeste has just said, partnerships are going to help us to make a difference, because if government understands child protection responsibilities and rights, but the home, and when I talk about the home, I'm talking about a child, which is the most important component, a parent, a caregiver, any responsible person that is taking care of a child. As long as we don't understand the rights of a child, we do not understand the responsibilities that we all have, then we are not going to be able to respond to the needs of a child. So that is why government says in partnerships, we can be able to make a difference. And please note, children recently launched what we call a children's manifesto, and that manifesto clearly indicates that, look, everybody needs to understand the rights of a child. Everybody has a responsibility to know that a child needs to be developed, a child needs to be protected, a child needs to be nurtured, and so that they can be enhanced. And then a child has a right to be given information and to give information. So the voice of a child is very important for us to be able to make a difference in their lives. And so parents, together with the lawmakers or administrators, have a responsibility to work together, because the child's voice is muffled, and yet they are vulnerable.
Victorine, I'm going to come to you here now, because you speak very strongly about that home base, and the fact that, you know, children, no matter which environment they engage in, the home is where they are nurtured and where they are taught to love. And you've got very specific views about how parents are often missing from the equation, whether that be due to circumstances. We know that families today cannot always survive with one parent at home. Lots of people are forced for both parents to work. How do we then create a more protective and nurturing environment for children in the home?
Thank you so much for that again. You know, my involved parenting approach as a working woman myself, married to a working man, comes from the point that no matter how you look at it, there's a triangle in a home. That triangle starts with the father, the mother, and a child. There is no way that if there is a disconnect, then there will be stability, both in the space where the child is and in the space where the parents are. Neglect, for instance, is one of the biggest vulnerability for children. And this is because the parents are not involved. It's physical involvement and, most importantly, mental involvement. You know, I think we could protect our children better if we are involved more mentally than physically. And where we are missing it today as busy parents is that we tend to be present physically but absent mentally, emotionally for the children. You know, and these children then seek closure in spaces that are not child-friendly. These spaces could be where the predators are. It could be just, like my daughter Stacy always says, it could be just electricity, where a child touches electricity and like collapses or dies in front of the parents. So it's extremely important for parents to understand that it's not about giving birth, it's not about providing, it's about being there and nurturing that child. Hence, I have the involved parenting approach that I take to every sector, including the school, including the government. It's the government's responsibility, as Sis Gugu has said, to educate us the parents who feel like we just have to provide for the children. It's the NGO's responsibility. It's my responsibility. It's your responsibility. But children also have to be empowered because their voices are stronger than we tend to listen to. They have to be empowered to sort of compel parents, government, and NGOs to listen to them.
And often children will be the first ones to know what their rights are and to educate their parents to say, hang on, I'm not comfortable with this situation. This is making me uncomfortable. Let's find a way around that. But sometimes in ways that parents don't hear, as you've said.
Because we suppress them, so we choose not to hear. And that is where I come in. The Involved Parenting movement just says, please be involved in your children's lives. Listen to them, don't be with them. Don't be for them, don't be for them, be with them.
Be with them.
So listen to them, talk to them, engage them. Our children fear us because we as parents still live in the past. And I'm also one of those where I would say to my child, you don't talk to me looking at me in my face, in my eyes straight. And then the next thing they look at me in my eyes straight, I go, you're disrespectful. So we send those conflicting messages that send them in hiding. Then they become vulnerable. So if we talk about protection, let's start in the home, but let's start in the relationship, that triangle. Is the father empowering the mother to protect the child? Is the mother...
Sorry to interrupt you there, but those home situations are very different for children who are not necessarily South African. And Vusimusi, I wanted to touch base with you here and find out the kinds of challenges faced by migrant children in South Africa. They are often dispossessed. They are often not linked in directly to the education or the healthcare system. And in a lot of cases, their rights are denied them to a greater degree than children of South Africa.
Thank you very much. I think, as you have rightfully said, and I think, as the Colonel said, that we've got very good legislation in the country, but the biggest problem that we have is the implementation of that legislation. I mean, the law is very clear about, the rights of the child being paramount, and that in any decision that is taken, whether by public or private institutions, the best interest of the child must be the ones that are considered first. But what we see happening, for example, look at education. We've got very good, the Constitution in Section 29 that talks about the right to education. We've got the Convention on the Rights of the Children. But then, on the other hand, you have a policy and a regulation that then comes out and completely removes, migrant children from the education system and starts to put conditions, that completely leave them out. We just saw a circular going around that, for example, in 2019, the matriculants are going to be allowed to go and write, but they must then produce, the ID or birth certificates in order for them to get the results. So you've got children that's been allowed to go to school, for 13 years or so, and after writing their matric, they're not given their certification. You wonder why that is happening. And you also look at, children that are born in South Africa, for example, to parents that are permanent residents or so, that are not given the permanent residence automatically, or the right to citizenship by birth. I mean, just this past week we saw a very good judgment from the public protector, where a child, a 4-year child, for example's birth certificate was defaced by a Home Affairs official, when the child is born by a South African father and the mother is a permanent resident holder from Zimbabwe. But the Home Affairs official became the law and decided just to deface the birth certificate instead of enforcing the rights of that particular child. So we've got a situation where, the law is sitting somewhere else, and then those that are implementing it, the real rights of the children, are not recognized at all, and they're actually being kicked out. I mean, we've got a case, for example, of a father that's got 2 children, that is South African, he lives in Tembisa. He's been told that, because the mother is from Lesotho, that in order for the children to get documentation, he must go and do a DNA test, and that's going to cost him 7,000. The man says, look, I haven't got the 7,000, and these are my children, and I've been looking after them. The one is 14 years, and now he cannot continue going to school.
And these challenges are so far-reaching. I want to touch on the issue of resources as well, because often when we look at budgets and allocations, these will be some of the reasons why things cannot get done. We want to provide adequate schooling or adequate sanitation for this community, but we're under-resourced. We do not have enough budget. It's going to take another 5 years. And it might be a question a bit left field here. What do you think, Gugu, and I'm going to start with you, has been the effect of corruption on child protection?
I think the first thing that has affected children in terms of corruption is the fact that officials in local government, where we expect services of children to be established and presented to children, officials, one, they're ill-informed they are not clear on the laws that protect children. And eventually, they have an inability to prioritize children and budget for children so that services can go to children. And it's simply because they don't understand that to improve the quality of life of a locality, you need to be able to plan properly for your children and then improve the quality of life of that particular of that particular locality. So, fraud that we have seen has disempowered children even more. Instead, adults have been filling their pockets instead of taking care of the future of society.
I think it's also important during Child Protection Week to not just look at children now, because a child who is a victim of violence, abuse or neglect today becomes part of an ongoing cycle and a system, and that affects the children of the future. So if we're looking at social ills and trying to fix a culture of violence, we have to start with children. And I'm going to head back there to you, Colonel, as well. A different side of the spectrum is children who have been exposed to violence at an early age often become perpetrators of violence during childhood. But that doesn't mean that their rights automatically fall away. How is our system trying to take care of those children and put them in a position where they won't reoffend or where we're trying to help them?
Anlie, you know, it's a very important question in the sense that I was reading an article. I think it was published by, I'm not sure which study, so please don't mind me that one. But and I think it's a very general thing. Children, and it comes into what Victorine said now as well, children who are subjected to domestic violence, if it's a girl child, she will tend to internalize it. So she becomes more vulnerable to crimes. Boys tend to externalize it, so they will become more aggressive and probably follow what mom and dad are doing, because that's your only frame of reference. So I want to give you a high five, Victorine, on saying the parenting things. And it doesn't matter what crime it is against a child. I think bringing that child back to the basics in terms of awareness campaigns, telling them these are your rights, these are crimes, this is your port of call, this is how to report it. But it doesn't only stick to the child. It sticks to you, to me, to you, and the whole of society, because by keeping quiet, you're actually perpetrating that crime in a way. And one of your questions related to also general safety of children. We must also remember that we're in an age of technology, and we're speaking about sexual crimes, etc. Remember the cybercrime aspect to children as well. The technology. Victorine, you saying parents at home, do you know what your child is doing on her cell phone, his cell phone? Are you protecting the child from becoming a victim of online child sexual abuse, from becoming a victim of cyberbullying, from becoming sextortion?
And from unwittingly becoming a perpetrator, because lots of children will spread messages or photographs of their peers, and that is a criminal act.
Correctly so. You're taking a video of a sex pic and you're passing it on. That's distribution of child pornography. You're just as guilty. And for that, I think society in a whole, including the SAP, has to look at heightening the awareness campaigns. And the good thing about our awareness campaigns, every time we're hitting the road, apart from the fact that it's an everyday FCS job, our awareness campaign. So we heighten it with Child Protection Week and 16 days of activism.
This is continuing work.
And we see a spike in our reporting, definitely after those periods. So, and it's not just SAPS, it's all our stakeholders that are partaking.
I'm going to interrupt you there, Colonel. We've got to take a short break. We're going to come back and continue talking about Child Protection Week, looking at a wrap of the issues facing children and how we can tackle them best to protect them. Do stay with ENCA now. This is Story of the Week.